A police dog retired and disappeared, then suddenly reappeared on a little girl's porch. And the reason behind it broke everyone's hearts. For 8 years, Rex had been the department's most decorated K-9 officer, saving countless lives and bringing criminals to justice. But when age forced his retirement, something inside him refused to accept that his purpose was over. What happened next wasn't just coincidence. It was a miracle that would change 2 lives forever. No one could have predicted the extraordinary connection that would form between a retired police dog and a sick little girl, or how his final mission would be his most important one yet. Rex stood tall beside Officer Mike, his tail perfectly still as the police chief pinned the Medal of Honor to his tactical vest. For the 8th time in his career, Rex was being celebrated as a hero. The German Shepherd's keen nose had led authorities to a kidnapped child just 48 hours earlier, bringing a 3-day nightmare to an end. But what the crowd couldn't see was the pain shooting through Rex's hips as he maintained his perfect stance. At 9 years old, arthritis had begun to cripple the once unstoppable K-9 officer. "The vet says it's time," Officer Mike whispered to the chief after the ceremony. "He's in constant pain now. If we don't retire him, we might lose him altogether." The words felt like betrayal in Mike's mouth. Rex wasn't just his partner, he was family. What Officer Mike didn't know was that for Rex, retirement wasn't just the end of a job. It was the loss of his entire identity, a purpose that had defined every moment of his existence since he was a puppy. The retirement ceremony the following week was supposed to be a celebration, but the confusion in Rex's eyes as they removed his tactical vest for the final time told a different story. He kept looking at the door, waiting for the call to duty that would never come again. But what no one realized was that Rex wasn't ready to give up his purpose, and fate had something extraordinary in store. The first week of retirement was the hardest. Rex paced the house endlessly, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors as he moved from window to window. Every siren in the distance made his ears perk up. Every police radio call from Mike's scanner sent him rushing to the door, tactical vest or not. "He'll adjust," the vet had assured Mike. "Give him time. Try to establish new routines." But Rex wasn't interested in leisurely walks around the neighborhood or the expensive orthopedic bed Mike had bought him. The fire in his eyes was dimming day by day. He stopped eating regularly. When Mike would leave for work, Rex would stand by the door, whining softly until his throat was raw. "I'm worried about him," Mike confessed to his partner during their shift. "It's like he's given up, like he doesn't know who he is anymore." On the 10th day of retirement, Mike came home to find Rex's bed empty. The back door was slightly ajar, so he'd forgotten to close it completely that morning. A quick search of the yard revealed nothing. No signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. Just absence. Rex was gone. The entire department mobilized. K-9 units from 3 counties joined the search. Posters went up across the city. Local news ran the story of the missing police hero. Officers searched day and night, calling Rex's name through neighborhoods and parks. But while the entire police department searched frantically for their beloved K-9, Rex had already found exactly where he needed to be. And it would break everyone's heart when they discovered why. 3 days after Rex's disappearance, the phone call came just as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. Mike had been dozing in his recliner, case files and search maps spread across his coffee table, when the shrill ring jolted him awake. "Is this Officer Mike Donovan?" a woman's voice asked, tentative and confused. The unfamiliar number had nearly sent the call to voicemail, but some instinct had made Mike answer. "Yes, speaking." Mike's voice was ragged from lack of sleep. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. and his uniform shirt from yesterday was still on, wrinkled from the fitful moments of rest he'd managed to catch between search parties. This might sound strange, but I think your dog is sleeping on our porch. There's a police tag on his collar with your information. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs. Is he hurt? Is he okay? The questions tumbled out in rapid succession. He seems fine, just determined. He won't come inside, won't take food from our hands. He just lies there watching the door. The address was in the Oakwood neighborhood, nearly 4 miles from Mike's home. It would have taken Rex hours to navigate the busy streets and intersections to reach it. As Mike pulled up to the modest 2-story house with blue shutters and a slightly overgrown lawn, his heart leapt into his throat. There, curled up on a faded welcome mat with fraying edges, was Rex. The German shepherd's head lifted at the sound of the familiar car engine, ears perking forward in recognition. But he didn't rush to greet Mike as expected. There was no joyful barking, no enthusiastic tail wagging that had characterized their reunions in the past. Instead, he rose slowly, his movements deliberate despite the obvious stiffness in his joints, positioning himself protectively in front of the door. He showed up 2 nights ago, explained Sarah Collins, the woman who had called, stepping out from behind the screen door. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. The first night, we heard scratching. My husband thought it was raccoons getting into the trash again. But when he checked, there was this beautiful dog just sitting there, staring at our door like he was waiting for something. She crossed her arms against the morning chill, watching as Mike approached his partner. We tried to bring him inside, but he refuses to leave the porch. We put out water and food, but he'll only eat when no one's watching. He just guards the door, day and night. Even during yesterday's thunderstorm, he wouldn't budge. Just got soaking wet and kept his post. Mike approached cautiously, calling Rex's name. The dog's tail gave a half-hearted wag, acknowledging his handler, but his posture remained vigilant, eyes continually darting back to the door behind him. I don't understand, Mike said, kneeling down to Rex's level, running his hands over the dog's coat to check for injuries. Why would he come here? Of all the places in the city. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she brushed them away quickly with the back of her hand. I think it might be because of my daughter, Lily. She's 8. She has leukemia, acute lymphoblastic. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. As if on cue, the front door opened slightly with a creak of old hinges, and a small, pale face peered out. The little girl's head was wrapped in a colorful scarf patterned with cartoon superheroes, her thin frame swimming in a hospital sweatshirt that proclaimed Brave Hearts Club across the front. Her skin had the translucent quality that came from too many days indoors, too many treatments that ravaged while they healed. Are you taking Rex away? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but at the sound of it, Rex's entire demeanor changed. His ears flattened slightly, his posture softened, and he turned his head to look at the child with an expression that could only be described as devotion. And that's when Mike noticed something that made his blood run cold. The Collins address, 1428 Maple Street. It was the same house where Rex had found his last missing child, just days before his retirement ceremony. The details came flooding back. A 5-year-old boy taken from his babysitter's care. A 72-hour search that had ended when Rex had tracked the scent to this very porch. Leading officers to the child hidden in a neighbor's shed, 2 houses down. She was at her grandmother's when the kidnapping happened, Sarah explained, seeing the recognition dawn on Mike's face. Her fingers nervously twisted the wedding band on her left hand. But Lily's been following Rex's story ever since. She cut out the newspaper article about him finding that little boy. She has it pinned above her bed. She calls him her guardian angel. Mike looked between the faithful dog and the fragile child, whose eyes held a wisdom far beyond her years. The pieces started falling into place. The inexplicable connection, the impossible journey Rex had made across town, navigating busy streets and intersections with his aging body. Last week, we got some bad news, Sarah continued, her voice dropping so Lily couldn't hear. The treatments aren't working as well as they hoped. We're running out of options. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she cleared her throat, composing herself with visible effort. Mom, can Rex come inside now? Lily asked, opening the door wider. I made him a special bed with my extra blanket. The soft one. Rex's ears perked up at the sound of his name on the girl's lips, and for the first time since Mike arrived, the dog's gaze left the door completely, turning to his handler with an intensity that spoke volumes. It wasn't the look of a pet seeking permission, but of a partner communicating a vital mission. As Mike looked between the faithful dog and the fragile child, he began to understand. Rex hadn't lost his purpose after all. The retirement that had seemed to break his spirit hadn't ended his calling. He'd found a new one, perhaps his most important yet. I think, Mike said slowly, feeling the weight of each word, that Rex might need to stay here a little longer. At those words, Rex's tail began to wag with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in weeks, and Lily's face broke into a smile that transformed her entirely, bringing color to her cheeks and light to her eyes. Some might call it coincidence, a retired police dog happening to find his way to a sick child's home. Others might attribute it to Rex remembering the address from his last case. But as Mike watched Rex gently follow Lily into the house, moving with a newfound purpose that seemed to ease the pain in his aging joints, he knew it was something more. Something that couldn't be explained by training or coincidence, or even memory. Something that spoke to the mysterious bond between hearts that recognize each other across impossible distances. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. Just a few days while Mike sorted out the paperwork, spoke with his superiors, and figured out what to do about Rex's apparent mission. But days turned into a week, and then two, and something remarkable began to happen in the modest, blue-shuttered house on Maple Street. Rex, who had been struggling with pain and depression since retirement, seemed to transform before everyone's eyes. The arthritic limp that had plagued his back legs became less pronounced with each passing day. His appetite returned with vigor, prompting Sarah to laugh about needing to increase their grocery budget. The dull, resigned look in his eyes was replaced with alert watchfulness, especially when Lily was nearby. It was as if the old police dog had tapped into some hidden reserve of vitality, drawing strength from a purpose that transcended his training. It's the strangest thing, Dr. Martinez said during a house call to check on Rex's condition in the Collins living room. She ran her experienced hands along Rex's spine, noting with surprise how the dog maintained perfect stillness for her examination, despite how he'd always been a difficult patient at the clinic. His inflammation markers are down. His mobility has improved significantly. Even the growth on his left haunch seems to have stopped progressing. She shook her head in wonder as she packed away, her stethoscope and various instruments into her worn leather bag. I've seen therapy dogs help patients before, but this is the first time I've seen a patient help a therapy dog. Medically speaking, it shouldn't make sense, but... She gestured toward the window, where Rex could be seen patiently walking alongside Lily as she made slow, determined circuits around the backyard birdbath. Mike had arranged a leave of absence from the force, explaining the situation to his captain in a conversation that began with skepticism and ended with his superior officer discreetly wiping his eyes. The department had rallied around the situation, covering Mike's shifts and even starting a collection to help with Lily's medical expenses. Now Mike found himself splitting his time between the Collins home and his own apartment, bringing fresh clothes and occasionally checking his mail before returning to what increasingly felt like his real home. He watched in amazement as Rex established routines around Lily's care with the precision of a military operation. The dog would lie beside her during her home treatments, his head resting gently on the edge of her bed, dark eyes fixed on her face with such concentration that the nurses who came to administer the treatments began timing their visits around Rex's shift, as they called it. When nausea from the medications overwhelmed her, Rex would alert the adults minutes before Lily herself showed any signs, giving them time to prepare the anti-nausea medication and bring the special basin decorated with underwater scenes that made the awful process slightly less traumatic. His accuracy was uncanny, a low whine followed by 3 quick paws at the nearest adult, then a meaningful glance toward Lily. It never failed. Most remarkably, on days when Lily's pain was at its worst, when the medication seemed to barely touch the deep ache that made her small body curl in on itself, Rex would position himself so she could lean against his warm body. He would regulate his breathing, slowing it deliberately until Lily's own ragged gasps began to match his rhythm. Something about his presence seemed to soothe her when even the prescribed pain medications fell short, creating a bubble of calm in the storm of her illness. The doctors can't explain it. Sarah confided to Mike one evening as they watched Rex and Lily dozing together on the living room couch, a half-finished game of Candyland abandoned on the coffee table. The soft glow of the table lamp cast warm shadows across their intertwined forms, the small girl and the large dog fitting together like puzzle pieces designed for each other. Her numbers have stabilized. They're not great, but they're not getting worse either. Dr. Patel said sometimes the body needs a period of equilibrium before it can begin to heal. It's like he's holding her steady somehow. She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit Mike had noticed emerged whenever she discussed Lily's condition. Last month, they were talking about more aggressive protocols, experimental treatments with terrible side effects. Now they're talking about cautious observation. It's like... She searched for words. It's like he's giving her body time to remember how to fight. David Collins, Lily's father, had been skeptical at first, a practical man uncomfortable with what seemed like magical thinking. An accountant by profession, he believed in numbers and probabilities, in what could be measured and verified. The sudden appearance of a retired police dog on their doorstep had struck him as a complication they didn't need while managing their daughter's illness. I thought it was just going to be one more thing to worry about, he admitted to Mike late one night as they sat on the back porch. Sharing the expensive scotch David had been saving for the day, Lily would be declared cancer-free. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it in his glass. Another responsibility when we were already drowning. He took a slow sip, his gaze fixed on the stars visible between the oak tree branches. But even I can't deny the changes in my daughter. She's fighting harder. Before Rex came, it was like she was slipping away from us a little more each day. Not just physically, her spirit was dimming. Now she's making plans again, talking about when I get better instead of if. Yesterday she asked if we could go to Disney World next summer. His voice broke on the last word, and he cleared his throat roughly. That's the first time she's talked about next summer in... I can't even remember how long. The neighbors noticed too. What began as one retired police dog on a porch became something of a community phenomenon. Mrs. Abernathy from next door, a retired pastry chef with arthritic hands that didn't stop her from baking, started bringing over homemade dog treats, peanut butter and pumpkin biscuits cut into the shape of police badges. Mr. Jensen, the retired veterinarian from 3 houses down, who had lost his wife to cancer the previous year, offered free checkups and brought over a memory foam dog bed that cost more than most people's mattresses. Children from Lily's school, who had been unsure how to interact with their sick classmate, found Rex to be the perfect buffer, gathering on the front lawn to hear Lily tell stories about her canine guardian. She embellished freely, describing how Rex could smell cancer cells and scare them away, how he had been a secret agent before becoming a police dog, how he knew 14 languages, including cat and squirrel. The children listened wide-eyed, and if the adults exchanged knowing glances over their heads, no one corrected the elaborate mythology Lily was constructing. The local newspaper ran a feature story, K9 Hero's New Mission, complete with photos of Rex lying protectively beside Lily's hospital bed during a checkup. The article went viral, drawing attention from national media. Letters began, arriving from across the country, many from families facing similar battles, others from former K9 handlers who recognized something profound in the bond between the retired dog and the sick child. One afternoon, as autumn leaves began to drift across the yard in lazy spirals of gold and crimson, Mike sat on the porch steps, watching Rex supervise Lily's tentative game of catch with 2 school friends. The dog moved with the careful precision of a border collie, keeping himself positioned to intercept the ball if it went wild, ensuring Lily never had to overexert herself to retrieve it. When she needed to rest, he would deliberately divert the ball toward the porch, creating natural breaks in the game without making Lily feel like the weak link. He was born for this, wasn't he? Sarah asked, settling beside Mike with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She had started wearing her hair down again, Mike noticed. When he'd first met her, her face had been drawn with worry, hair pulled back severely as if she couldn't spare the energy for anything beyond functionality. Now there was a softness returning to her features, tentative but unmistakable. Mike accepted the cup gratefully, warming his hands around the ceramic mug painted with handprints that was clearly a gift from Lily in younger, healthier days. I always thought he was born to be a police dog. Best tracking nose in the department, fearless in pursuit, could find a missing person in conditions that would stop most dogs in their tracks. But now, he shook his head, watching as Rex gently nudged the ball back toward Lily with his nose, then gave an encouraging bark when she managed to throw it to her friend Emma. Now I think maybe all of that was just preparing him for this. For Lily? Sarah's eyes followed her daughter, cataloging the small victories, the color in her cheeks, the way she had managed to play for 15 minutes without needing to sit down. For knowing exactly where he needed to be, exactly when he was needed most. Mike took a sip of his coffee. You know, in the department, there were stories about Rex that nobody could explain. How he'd suddenly insist on changing the patrol route and lead us straight to a crime in progress. How he once refused to get in the car until we checked under it. Turned out there was a bomb. We called it his spooky sense. Sarah nodded slowly. Lily told me yesterday that Rex talks to her in her dreams, that he promises her she's going to get better. She glanced sideways at Mike. I know it's just a child's imagination, but you want to believe it, Mike finished for her. With everything in me, she whispered. What neither of them said aloud, what hung in the air between them, was the question of how long this reprieve would last. Lily's doctors remained cautiously optimistic, but leukemia was an unpredictable enemy, capable of surging back just when victory seemed within reach. And Rex himself was not a young dog. The gray around, his muzzle had spread, and despite his renewed vigor, there were moments when the weight of his years showed in the careful way he lowered himself to the floor, in the slight delay before he could rise after a long rest. But on that golden afternoon, with laughter floating across the yard and Rex's tail waving like a flag of defiance against the darkness, it was enough that they were here now, together, writing a story that defied explanation. The game wound down as Lily's energy began to flag. Without prompting, Rex herded the children toward the porch, where Sarah had set out juice boxes and apple slices arranged in the shape of flowers. As the children chatted, Rex positioned himself at Lily's feet, his solid presence a reminder that rest was not defeat, but simply part of the rhythm of healing. Later, after her friends had gone home, and the shadows lengthened across the lawn, Lily sat on the porch swing with her thin legs dangling, one hand absently stroking Rex's ear. "Mom says you might have to go back to your real home soon," she said to Mike, her voice casual but her eyes watchful. Mike, who had been helping David clean the gutters, climbed down from the ladder and approached the swing. "I do need to check on my apartment sometimes," he said carefully, "but Rex seems pretty determined to stay here with you." Lily nodded solemnly. "He has to. We made a deal." "A deal?" Mike settled beside her on the swing, which creaked gently under their combined weight. "I promised I would keep fighting the bad cells if he promised to stay until I'm better." She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the rules of a board game. He said that was a fair trade. Mike felt something catch in his throat. "When did he tell you that?" "In my dreams, silly. That's when dogs can talk to people. Everybody knows that." She yawned widely, the brief burst of energy from her friend's visit fading. "He also said you need someone to take care of you too. He's worried about you being alone." Before Mike could respond to this unexpected revelation, Lily's eyes drifted closed, her small body leaning trustingly against his side. Rex raised his head, meeting Mike's gaze with an expression that seemed to contain volumes. Concern, affirmation, and something that looked remarkably like a challenge. And somewhere in the space between a sick child's hope and an old dog's devotion, something miraculous was taking root. Something that would change not just one family, but an entire community, in ways none of them could yet imagine. A web of connection spreading outward from the unlikely partnership of a retired K9 and the little girl he had chosen to guard, touching lives that had seemed disconnected, healing wounds both visible and hidden. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mike found himself wondering which of them was really being saved, and whether perhaps the answer was all of them, each healing the others in ways that medicine and training could never achieve alone. The first snow of winter arrived early that year, blanketing Maple Street in a pristine white that muffled sounds and transformed the ordinary neighborhood into something magical. Rex stood at attention on the front porch, his dark fur dusted with snowflakes, steam rising from his nostrils as he surveyed his domain with the vigilance that had never left him, even as the weeks turned to months. Inside, the Collins home had undergone its own transformation. What had once been a place shadowed by illness had become something else entirely. Still a home where a sick child lived, but no longer defined solely by that reality. Laughter echoed through rooms that had previously held only whispered consultations and muffled tears. "I can't believe they're actually letting her participate," Sarah said, her fingers working nimbly as she adjusted the angel costume draped over Lily's thin shoulders. The kitchen table was covered with glitter, fabric scraps, and the creative debris of last-minute costume alterations. "Even if it's just for the opening scene," David added, his normally practical face alight with a cautious joy as he recorded the fitting on his phone. "Dr. Patel said her counts are stable enough for a short appearance, as long as she doesn't overdo it." Lily twirled carefully, the silver tinsel halo bobbing above her head. Her hair had started growing back in soft, downy patches. Not enough to forego her collection of colorful scarves, but enough to make her look in the mirror and see glimpses of her future self emerging from the cocoon of illness. "Rex needs a costume, too," she declared, eyeing her faithful guardian who had come inside at the sound of her voice. "He can be my special angel dog." Mike, who had been quietly nursing a cup of coffee at the counter, laughed. "I'm not sure Rex would appreciate wings and a halo." "No, not like that," Lily said with the exaggerated patience children reserve for adults who fail to grasp the obvious. "Angel dogs don't need costumes because they're already angels on the inside. Everyone can see it if they look properly." The school's holiday pageant had become the focal point of Lily's determination, a goal that seemed both modest and monumental. When her teacher had suggested she might participate remotely via video, Lily had set her jaw with the same stubborn resolve they'd come to recognize whenever she faced a particularly unpleasant treatment. "I want to be there for real," she had insisted, "even if I can only do one part." What no one had anticipated was the way the entire production would reorganize itself around this goal. Her classmates, who had witnessed Rex's unwavering dedication during his supervised visits to the school, had voted unanimously to modify the traditional pageant to include a special role for Lily that would allow her to participate without taxing her fragile strength. The music teacher had composed a new opening number. The art teacher had designed a special platform that would allow Lily to remain seated if necessary. Parents had volunteered additional support, from specialized lighting to ensure she wouldn't overheat under the stage lights, to an understudy prepared to step in at a moment's notice if Lily's energy flagged. And through it all, Rex had maintained his quiet vigil, his presence a constant reminder that some battles couldn't be seen, but were no less real for their invisibility. "The real question," Mike said, returning to the present moment as Lily practiced her lines with David, "is whether they'll let Rex attend." Sarah's hands stilled on the costume. "I hadn't even considered that he wouldn't be there. He's been allowed at every doctor's appointment, even in the hospital for her last round of tests." "That's different. Medical facilities have protocols for service and therapy animals. A public school auditorium filled with children and parents is another matter entirely." The worry line appeared between Sarah's brows, the one that had become less prominent in recent weeks, but never fully disappeared. "She won't go without him. You know that." Mike nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll make some calls. Rex's status as a retired police K-9 might help. And I know the district superintendent from a community outreach program we did last year." What went unspoken was their shared understanding of how crucial this milestone was for Lily. Not just attending the pageant, but doing so with her guardian beside her. In the delicate ecosystem of her recovery, Rex had become an essential element, as important as any medication or treatment protocol. The night of the pageant arrived with the particular electricity that surrounds children's performances, a mixture of anticipation, nerves, and the special magic that happens when ordinary gymnasiums are transformed by paper stars and painted backdrops into worlds of wonder. Thanks to Mike's connections and a rapidly approved amendment to the school's policy on animals in the building, Rex was permitted to attend, wearing a specially designed vest that identified him as a therapy animal. The compromise was that he would remain in the wings rather than on stage. a distinction that meant little to Rex, whose focus remained entirely on Lily, regardless of arbitrary human boundaries. Backstage was controlled chaos, with teachers attempting to organize excited children while parents made last-minute costume adjustments. In the midst of this swirling activity, Lily sat calmly on a folding chair, Rex at her feet, an island of serenity in the storm. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, adjusting the tinsel halo one last time. Lily shook her head, her eyes bright with an emotion that transcended simple excitement. "Rex says everything is going to be perfect." From his position by her side, the German shepherd looked up at the sound of his name, his intelligent eyes moving between Lily and the adults as if following the conversation. 5 minutes to places," called the music teacher, her voice rising above the backstage chatter. As parents were ushered out to take their seats in the audience, Mike knelt beside Lily, his voice low and serious. "Remember our deal. If you start feeling tired, you give the signal, and I'll come get you right away. No pushing yourself." Lily nodded solemnly, though the gleam in her eye suggested she had her own ideas about how the evening would unfold. "Don't worry, Officer Mike. Rex will tell you if I need help." The pageant began with the traditional procession of angels, shepherds, and wise men, but with a notable difference. Instead of the principal's usual welcome, the curtains parted to reveal Lily seated on a specially constructed cloud-like platform, Rex positioned discreetly in the shadows beside her. Her voice, clear and surprisingly strong, rose above the hushed auditorium. "Before the story you all know begins, I have a secret to share with you tonight. Angels walk among us, not just with wings, but sometimes with paws and hearts so bright." The spotlight widened slightly to illuminate Rex, who maintained his dignified pose, seemingly unperturbed by the audience's collective murmur of appreciation. "They guard us when the night is dark and long. They guide us when the path ahead seems lost. Their love becomes the melody, the song that gives us courage, whatever the cost." As Lily delivered the final lines of her introduction, a transformation seemed to come over her. The pallor that had become so familiar gave way to a glow that couldn't be attributed solely to stage lighting. For those precious moments, she wasn't a sick child defying the odds to participate in a school pageant. She was simply Lily, sharing a truth she had discovered on her journey. The rest of the pageant proceeded according to tradition, with Lily watching from the wings after her opening role, Rex never leaving her side. When the final bows were taken and the audience rose in a standing ovation, Mike noticed something that caught in his throat. David and Sarah standing side by side, their hands clasped together for the first time in months. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep still wearing her tinsel halo, the adults gathered in the kitchen, voices low. Dr. Patel called with her latest results. Sarah said, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "The experimental treatment is showing promising signs. Her blast cell count is down significantly." David reached across the table to cover her hand with his. He said, "It's not a remission yet, but it's the best news we've had in over a year." Sarah finished, tears shining in her eyes. Mike's gaze drifted to the living room, where Rex lay on the special bed next to the couch, his eyes half closed, but his ears still alert, eternally on duty. "You know," David said, following Mike's gaze, "I've been thinking about what Lily said in her poem tonight. About angels walking among us." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with venturing into territory that challenged his practical nature. "I'm not a religious man. I believe in what I can see, what I can prove. But what's happened since Rex arrived defies explanation. Mike supplied. Exactly. David nodded, relief evident in his expression at having his thoughts articulated. The medical team calls it a fortuitous response to treatment. They talk about psychosomatic components of recovery and the documented benefits of animal therapy. But they can't explain why her results started improving specifically after Rex arrived, or how he knows when she's about to spike a fever before the thermometer shows it. Sarah's fingers tightened around her mug. Do we need to explain it? Isn't it enough that it's happening? The question hung in the air, unanswerable yet somehow perfect in its simplicity. Outside, snow continued to fall, adding fresh layers to the world. Inside, in the warm kitchen of a home that had become a sanctuary, 3 adults sat in companionable silence, united by their shared witness to something that transcended ordinary understanding. A bond between a child and her guardian that seemed to exist in a realm where hope was not just a fragile wish, but a tangible force. And in the soft darkness of the living room, Rex shifted slightly, settling more comfortably into his vigil, his breath syncing with the rhythm of Lily's sleep just down the hall, connected by invisible threads that neither distance nor darkness could sever. The winter deepened outside, but within the walls of 1428 Maple Street, something else was taking root. Something as delicate as the first shoots of spring pushing through frozen ground, as powerful as the ancient instinct that had guided a retired police dog across miles of city streets to find exactly where he was needed most. The last patches of winter snow retreated beneath the persistent warmth of April sunshine, revealing tender shoots of green in the garden beds that lined the front walk of the Collins home. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching as Rex patrolled the perimeter of their yard with the methodical precision that had become as much a part of their morning routine as breakfast itself. He's checking the boundaries again, she remarked to Mike, who was reviewing Lily's medication schedule at the kitchen table. Same pattern every day, never misses a corner. Mike glanced up, a smile softening the worry lines that had etched themselves around his eyes over the past months. Old habits die hard. He was trained to secure perimeters. Now he's just adapted the protocol to fit his current assignment. The word assignment had become their shorthand for the inexplicable mission that had brought Rex to their doorstep 6 months earlier. What had begun as a strange encounter had evolved into something so integral to their lives that none of them could imagine a time before Rex's steady presence. Speaking of assignments, Sarah said, turning from the window, Dr. Patel wants to discuss moving forward with the bone marrow transplant. Lily's latest results are holding steady, and he thinks this might be our window of opportunity. The atmosphere in the kitchen shifted, the comfortable morning routine suddenly charged with the weight of possibility and fear that accompanied every major medical decision. A bone marrow transplant had always been the ultimate goal of Lily's treatment plan. But the procedure carried its own significant risks. The timing had to be perfect, her body strong enough to withstand the grueling process, the cancer sufficiently in retreat to maximize chances of success. When would they want to do it? Mike asked, his voice carefully neutral, though his hand tightened around his pen. 3 weeks from now, if the donor preparations go as scheduled. Sarah set her mug down, her fingers trembling slightly. David's flying back tonight from his conference to discuss it with the medical team tomorrow. They want both of us there for the consultation. Mike nodded, already mentally rearranging his schedule. Since taking extended leave from the police force, he had transitioned to part-time administrative work that allowed him the flexibility to remain involved in Lily's care. The arrangement had raised eyebrows initially, a decorated officer choosing desk duty to help a family he'd met through such unusual circumstances. But his colleagues had gradually come to understand that some callings transcended professional boundaries. "I'll stay with Lily during your meeting," he offered. "We can work on her science project. The bean plants are starting to sprout." Sarah's smile held a mixture of gratitude and something more complex. "You know, sometimes I forget that you haven't always been part of our lives. It feels like you and Rex have always been here, like we were just waiting for you to arrive." The sentiment hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from cautious alliance to deep friendship, with occasional moments that hinted at the possibility of something more. Neither had acted on these moments, their focus remaining steadfastly on Lily's recovery. But the potential hummed beneath the surface of their interactions like a quiet electrical current. "I know what you mean," Mike replied finally. "Sometimes I try to remember what my life was like before." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the kitchen, the house, the family that had somehow become his own. "All of this. It feels like a different lifetime." Sarah nodded, understanding precisely what he couldn't quite articulate. "Before Rex led you here." "Before Rex led me home," Mike corrected softly, then quickly busied himself with the medication chart, uncomfortable with the vulnerability of the admission. Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected revelation, the back door swung open, and Lily entered with Rex at her heels. Her cheeks were flushed with color, not the hectic flush of fever that had once been so common, but the healthy glow of a child who had been laughing in the spring sunshine. The soft fuzz of new hair covered her head in a pale blonde cap, catching the light like a halo. "Mom, Officer Mike, look what Rex found." She held out her cupped hands, revealing a small blue robin's egg, intact but clearly abandoned. It was on the ground under the oak tree. Rex showed me where it was, but he wouldn't let me touch it until he sniffed it all over to make sure it was safe. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances, familiar with Rex's uncanny ability to communicate complex instructions to Lily through what appeared to be a combination of body language and some deeper connection neither adult fully comprehended. "It must have fallen from its nest," Sarah said, examining the egg carefully. "Sometimes the mother bird will reject an egg if something's wrong with it." Lily's face fell. "So it won't ever hatch? The baby bird inside will die?" The question hung in the air, weighted with implications that extended far beyond the fate of one small egg. In the Collins household, conversations about life and death had never been abstract concepts, but daily realities navigated with as much grace as possible. Rex nudged Lily's leg gently, drawing her attention downward. He looked meaningfully at the egg, then up at the kitchen window where a small herb garden was thriving in pots along the sill. "Rex thinks we should try to save it," Lily announced with absolute certainty. "He says we need to keep it warm and safe until it's ready to hatch." Mike raised an eyebrow at Sarah, silently asking how she wanted to handle this potentially heartbreaking project. Sarah hesitated, weighing the risks of disappointment against the therapeutic value of nurturing hope. "Well," she said finally, "we would need to build a proper incubator and research exactly what robin eggs need to develop properly. It would be a big responsibility, and even with the best care, it might not survive." "I know," Lily said solemnly, "but Rex says everyone deserves a fighting chance." The simplicity of the statement, delivered with such conviction, settled over the kitchen like a benediction. Sarah reached for her tablet, already pulling up information on homemade incubators, while Mike began rummaging through drawers for supplies. "First rule of rescue operations," he said, slipping naturally into teaching mode. is to create a stable environment. Let's start by making a safe place for the egg while we build something more permanent. As they worked together, constructing a temporary nest from a small box lined with soft cotton, Mike found himself studying Rex, who had positioned himself at Lily's side, his attention divided between the egg and his young charge. There was something in the dog's demeanor, a focused intentionality that went beyond animal instinct or even the advanced training he had received as a police K-9. "You know," Sarah said quietly as Lily carefully transferred the egg to its temporary home. "Robin eggs take about 2 weeks to hatch after they're laid." Mike caught the significance immediately. 2 weeks, just before Lily would need to enter the hospital for her pre-transplant conditioning. If the egg was viable, if everything went perfectly, she might get to witness the hatching before facing her own rebirth of sorts through the transplant. "That's some timing," he murmured, just low enough for Sarah's ears alone. She nodded, her eyes never leaving her daughter, who was now earnestly explaining to Rex the importance of maintaining proper humidity levels for egg development. Coincidence? With Rex involved? I've stopped believing in coincidences. The morning unfolded into a flurry of research and construction. David called from his conference to check in, his initial skepticism about the egg rescue mission melting into amused support when he heard the animation in Lily's voice as she detailed their plans. By lunchtime, they had assembled a surprisingly sophisticated incubator using a small plastic container, a desk lamp with a specific wattage bulb for heat, a digital thermometer, and a small dish of water for humidity. "Now we need to turn it regularly, just like the mother bird would," Lily explained, carefully rotating the egg a quarter turn with a clean cotton swab. "And we have to keep track of the temperature and humidity every day." "This sounds like an excellent addition to your science project," Sarah suggested. "You could document the whole process, if you want to, of course." Lily's eyes widened at the idea. "I could make a journal, with pictures and temperature charts and everything. And then, when the baby bird hatches, we can help it learn to fly and—" "Whoa there," Mike interjected gently. "Let's take it one step at a time. First, we focus on creating the right conditions for the egg. If, and it's a big if, it hatches, we'll need to learn a whole new set of skills for caring for a baby bird. And," Sarah added, her voice taking on the careful tone she used when discussing difficult realities, "we need to be prepared for the possibility that despite our best efforts, the egg might not hatch. Sometimes nature has its own plans that we can't change." Lily's expression sobered, but the determined set of her jaw remained. "I know, Mom. Just like sometimes medicines don't work the way doctors hope they will. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try." She glanced down at Rex, who had settled at her feet, his vigilant gaze never leaving her face. "Rex says hope isn't about knowing what will happen. It's about believing in possibilities." Sarah blinked rapidly, fighting back the sudden threat of tears. "When did you get so wise, my little philosopher?" Lily shrugged, already turning back to her egg with the single-minded focus that children bring to their passions. "Rex teaches me things when we talk in my dreams." The casual statement hung in the air after Lily moved to the living room with her science notebook, leaving the adults to exchange meaningful glances. It wasn't the first time Lily had mentioned these dream conversations with Rex, but the depth and complexity of the wisdom she attributed to him continued to startle them. "Do you think—" Sarah began, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to frame her question. "That Rex is actually communicating with her somehow?" Mike finished. "I don't know. but I've seen enough in my years working with him to know that his intelligence goes beyond what we typically attribute to animals. And there's research about children with serious illnesses sometimes developing heightened intuition or sensitivity. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the living room, where Lily was now showing Rex her first sketch of the egg in its incubator. The dog's attention focused on her with an intensity that bordered on devotion. "Whatever it is," she said finally, "it's helping her. And right now, that's all that matters." Later that evening, after Lily had finally been persuaded to leave her egg patient long enough for dinner and homework, Mike took Rex for their nightly walk around the neighborhood. These walks had become a time of reflection for Mike, a chance to process the complex emotions that came with being unexpectedly woven into the fabric of the Collins family's life. The spring evening was mild, with the scent of flowering trees heavy in the air. Neighbors waved from porches and gardens, now familiar with the odd pair who had become fixtures in the community. Mrs. Abernathy called out from her driveway, where she was unloading groceries from her car. "Officer Mike, how's our Lily doing today?" The collective ownership in her phrasing, "our Lily," no longer struck Mike as unusual. Over the months, the neighborhood had rallied around the Collins family in ways both large and small. Meal trains during difficult treatment weeks, volunteers to mow the lawn when David and Sarah were spending long hours at the hospital, a community fundraiser that had helped offset some of the staggering medical expenses not covered by insurance. "She's doing well, Mrs. A," Mike replied, pausing to help the elderly woman with a particularly heavy bag. "Getting stronger every day, and she started a new project, trying to save an abandoned robin's egg." Mrs. Abernathy's face creased into a smile. "That sounds just like our Lily, always looking out for the little ones." She reached down to pat Rex, who accepted the affection with dignified tolerance. "And how's our hero doing? Still keeping watch?" "Always," Mike confirmed, a surge of pride warming his chest as he looked down at his former partner. "He never wavers." After helping Mrs. Abernathy with the rest of her groceries, they continued their walk, eventually pausing at the corner of Maple and Elm. The evening was settling into twilight, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. "You knew exactly what you were doing with that egg, didn't you?" he said quietly. Rex looked up at him, ears alert. It wasn't just about saving a baby bird. It was about giving her something to nurture, something to hope for. Rex's tail wagged once, the equivalent of a nod in his economical language of gestures. "The transplant is going to be rough, old friend. Rougher than anything she's faced so far. She'll need something to focus on beyond the pain and isolation." As if in agreement, Rex turned his gaze toward the Collins house, just visible down the block, its windows glowing with warm light against the gathering dusk. The message seemed clear. His commitment remained unwavering, regardless of the challenges ahead. "You know," Mike continued, feeling slightly foolish but compelled to voice the thoughts that had been circling in his mind. "Sometimes I wonder if you led me here for more than just Lily. If maybe you knew I needed them as much as they needed us." Rex's dark eyes, reflecting the streetlight above them, seemed to hold wisdom far beyond what any animal should possess. He leaned gently against Mike's leg, a rare gesture of affection from the typically reserved dog. The simple contact broke something open in Mike's chest, a dam of emotion he'd been carefully maintaining since the day Rex had led him to the Collins doorstep. Before Rex, his life had been defined by his work. The next case, the next pursuit, the next rescue. His apartment had been little more than a place to sleep between shifts. His social circle limited to fellow officers who understood the demands of the job. Now, somehow, he had become part of something entirely different. a family, a community, a mission that transcended professional duty and ventured into territory he couldn't quite name but recognized as essential. "Come on," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's head back. Sarah's making that pasta thing you like." The following weeks unfolded in a flurry of preparation. David and Sarah attended endless consultations, signed mountains of paperwork, and underwent the emotional roller coaster of hope and terror that accompanied each decision. Through it all, Lily maintained a remarkable equilibrium, dividing her attention between preparing for her upcoming hospitalization and tending to her egg, which against all odds remained viable in the incubator they had constructed together. The egg became the focal point of Lily's science project, with detailed observations recorded in a journal decorated with hand-drawn birds and flowers. Her teacher, Miss Winters, made special arrangements to visit the house for progress updates, bringing along reference books on ornithology and development. "I've never seen her so engaged in a project," Ms. Winters confided to Sarah during one such visit, as they watched Lily carefully measure the humidity levels in the incubator. Her scientific observations are remarkably precise for her age. Sarah nodded, a mixture of pride and wistfulness coloring her expression. She's always been methodical, even before she got sick. But now there's I don't know how to describe it, a depth to her understanding. Children who face serious illness often develop wisdom beyond their years, Ms. Winters said gently. They confront realities that most adults prefer to ignore. "Sometimes I forget she's only 8, Sarah admitted. "She says things that stop me in my tracks. Last night, she told me that pain isn't the opposite of joy. It's part of the same spectrum, that without one, we wouldn't recognize the other." She shook her head in wonder. "What 8-year-old thinks like that?" "An extraordinary one," Ms. Winters replied, her gaze drifting to where Rex lay beside Lily, his watchful presence a constant in the child's life. "And she has extraordinary support." Rex's behavior subtly shifted as the transplant date approached. He became even more attentive, if such a thing were possible, rarely letting Lily out of his sight. He began sleeping directly beneath her window rather than on his bed in the corner of her room, as if positioning himself between her and some unseen threat from the outside world. His routine expanded to include regular inspection of the egg incubator, his nose carefully testing the air around it, his eyes tracking the minute changes in the shell that only he seemed able to detect. When Lily was resting, exhausted from a particularly intensive round of pre-transplant tests, Rex would maintain his position beside the incubator, as if standing guard over both of his charges. "It's like he understands the connection between Lily and that egg," David remarked one afternoon, watching from the doorway as Rex alternated his attention between the sleeping child and the small blue oval in its carefully maintained environment, as if they're both fragile lives he's determined to protect. Mike, who had been helping David install a new air purification system in preparation for Lily's return home after the transplant, nodded thoughtfully. Rex has always had an uncanny ability to make connections that others miss. It's what made him such an exceptional police dog. He doesn't just track individual scents. He understands patterns, relationships between seemingly unrelated elements. David's expression shifted, the carefully maintained optimism giving way momentarily to the fear that lurked beneath. "Do you think he knows something we don't? About the transplant, I mean. About Lily's chances?" The question hung between them, giving voice to the anxiety that shadowed every preparation, every consultation, every decision. The medical team had been cautiously positive, citing Lily's improved condition and the perfect donor match as favorable indicators. But bone marrow transplants were inherently risky, with complications that could arise without warning. Mike considered his answer carefully, aware of the weight his opinion carried with David, who had come to trust his insights into Rex's behavior. "I think," he said finally, "that if Rex sensed Lily was in immediate danger, his behavior would be different, more agitated, more protective. This feels more like preparation, gathering strength for a challenge he knows is coming." David nodded slowly, seeming to find some comfort in this assessment. Sarah says the same thing, that his calmness reassures her more than any medical statistic. "He's been through difficult operations before," Mike added. "He understands the concept of necessary risk, of fighting through pain toward recovery." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Lily stirring in her bedroom. Immediately, Rex was on his feet, moving to her side with the silent efficiency that characterized all his movements. By the time she opened her eyes, he was there, his muzzle gently nudging her hand in greeting. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. "Is my egg okay?" Rex gave a soft woof of assurance, causing Lily to smile and struggle to a sitting position. "Good. Ms. Winters says it might start hatching any day now, if it's going to hatch at all." The timing wasn't lost on any of them. The egg, if viable, would likely hatch just before Lily was scheduled to enter the hospital for her pre-transplant conditioning, a symmetry that seemed too perfect to be coincidental. The night before Lily was scheduled to enter the hospital, the Collins home hummed with subdued activity. Sarah packed and repacked the hospital bag, ensuring every comfort item was included. David reviewed insurance paperwork and finalized arrangements for extended leave from his accounting firm. Lily, with Mike's help, prepared detailed care instructions for her egg, which would remain at home under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Abernathy, who had volunteered to check on it several times daily. "And make sure the temperature stays between 98 and 100 degrees. Lily instructed, pointing to the digital thermometer attached to the incubator. "And the humidity needs to be above 50%, which you can check with this little gauge here." Mrs. Abernathy nodded solemnly, taking notes in a small floral notebook. "And how often should I turn it?" "3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. Just a quarter turn each time, very gently." Lily demonstrated with a cotton swab, her movements delicate and precise. "And if it starts to hatch, you have to call us right away so we can watch on the video chat." "I promise, sweetheart. I won't miss a single crack or peep." The elderly woman's eyes shone with determination behind her bifocals. "Your little bird will have the best care possible until you're home again." After Mrs. Abernathy departed with her detailed instructions, the family gathered for a quiet dinner. Lily's favorite pasta with extra cheese, a special treat before the restricted diet of the transplant ward. The conversation was deliberately light, focusing on plans for the summer, the vegetable garden they would plant when Lily returned home, the community picnic scheduled for July that they were determined she would attend. Mike found himself unable to sleep that night, his mind racing with all the possibilities that lay ahead, both miraculous and devastating. He made his way downstairs for a glass of water, only to find David sitting alone in the darkened living room, a tumbler of scotch untouched on the coffee table before him. "I keep thinking about that first day," David said without preamble, his voice rough with emotion. "When Rex showed up on our porch, I thought it was just some strange coincidence. A lost dog who happened to pick our house." He shook his head slowly. "I've spent my whole life believing in things I can count, measure, predict. Spreadsheets, profit margins, statistical probabilities." Mike settled into the armchair across from him, waiting. The doctors give Lily a 65% chance of full recovery with his transplant. Better odds than we've had before, but still. He finally reached for the scotch, taking a small sip. I find myself putting more faith in the fact that Rex is here than in all their medical statistics. Isn't that strange? That after everything, I'm counting on a dog's, intuition? Divine guidance? He laughed softly, the sound tinged with wonder rather than mockery. I don't think it matters what we call it, Mike said after a moment. I've seen Rex do things that defy explanation throughout his career. Find people who should have been impossible to find. Know things he shouldn't have been able to know. The how of it seems less important than the fact that it happens. David nodded slowly. Sarah says you've become a believer too. I've always been a believer in Rex, Mike corrected gently. The rest, I'm still figuring out. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Two men united by their concern for a child and their grudging acceptance that some forces in the universe operated beyond the boundaries of rational explanation. You know, David said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Before all this, before Lily got sick, Sarah and I were talking about separating. Nothing dramatic, no big fights, just drifting apart. Different priorities, different dreams. We were more like roommates than partners. Mike remained silent, sensing that David needed to articulate something important. Then the diagnosis came, and everything else seemed trivial. We put our issues aside to focus on Lily. He took another sip of scotch. But something strange happened along the way. In fighting for our daughter, we rediscovered each other. And then Rex arrived, and you came into our lives. And suddenly we weren't just two terrified parents facing the unimaginable alone. We became part of something larger. He set the glass down, his expression earnest in the dim light. Whatever happens with the transplant, I want you to know that you've become family to us. Both of you. However this turns out. The simple declaration, offered without embellishment, settled over Mike like a mantle. Both a comfort and a responsibility. Before he could formulate a response, a soft sound from the stairs drew their attention. Lily stood on the bottom step in her favorite star-patterned pajamas. Rex, a silent shadow beside her. I can't sleep, she announced. Rex says it's because we're all too busy worrying instead of remembering the important thing. David straightened, instantly alert to his daughter's needs. What important thing is that, sweetheart? Lily crossed to the couch and climbed into her father's lap, a privilege she had recently begun to reclaim as her strength returned. That we're all together. And that means we can handle anything. She looked between the two men with the peculiar wisdom that sometimes emerged from children who had faced mortality too young, even if things get really hard for a while. From his position by the stairs, Rex made a soft sound of affirmation, his gaze steady on the tableau before him. Father and daughter entwined, Mike keeping watch from the armchair, all of them connected by invisible threads of love and concern that had somehow become strong enough to hold back the darkness. Rex is right, David said, his arms tightening around Lily. We're stronger together, and we're going to get through this next part the same way we've gotten through everything else, one day at a time, supporting each other. And then we'll come home, and my egg will hatch, and everything will be new again. Lily said with the simple certainty of a child who has decided on her own version of the future. Mike caught David's eye over Lily's head, seeing his own complex emotions reflected there. Hope tempered by realism, faith shadowed by fear. But beneath it all, a resolute determination to honor Lily's vision of possibility, regardless of what challenges lay ahead. "That sounds like a perfect plan," Mike said, his voice steady despite the tightness in his throat. "And speaking of plans, I think we all need some sleep if we're going to be ready for tomorrow." Lily nodded reluctantly, allowing her father to carry her back upstairs to bed. Rex followed, his nails clicking softly on the wooden steps, his duty never complete. Left alone in the living room, Mike moved to the window, gazing out at the quiet street bathed in moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called, a melancholy sound that seemed to echo the bitter sweetness of the moment. Tomorrow would bring change, uncertainty, the beginning of a grueling process with no guaranteed outcome. But it would also bring the next chapter in a story that had already defied conventional expectations. He thought of the small blue egg in its carefully maintained incubator, holding its own fragile promise of new life. Of Rex, whose mysterious appearance had altered the trajectory of so many lives, including his own. Of Lily, whose courage in the face of unimaginable challenges had taught them all about the true nature of strength. Outside, the first tentative chirps of dawn birds heralded the arrival of a new day, one that would carry Lily away from the sanctuary of home and into the clinical environment of the hospital's bone marrow transplant unit. But as the Collins household stirred to life in preparation for this next chapter, there was a palpable current of determination running beneath the nervous energy. And in the makeshift incubator on Lily's desk, monitored by a small camera that would allow her to watch from her hospital room, a tiny blue egg contained its own promise of renewal, a perfect metaphor for the fragile hope they all carried as they prepared to face whatever lay ahead. As the first rays of sunlight spilled through the eastern windows, Rex took up his position beside the front door, ready to escort his charge on the next phase of her journey. His posture was alert but calm, his eyes clear and focused, the stance of a guardian who understood both the gravity of the mission and the importance of unwavering presence. In the kitchen, Sarah prepared a special breakfast, heart-shaped pancakes with fresh strawberries, while David loaded the car with carefully packed bags. Mike checked the video link between Lily's tablet and the egg incubator one last time, ensuring she would have constant access to her project from her hospital room. And Lily herself moved through these preparations with a serenity that belied her years, pausing occasionally to whisper something to Rex or to check on her egg one last time. There was an almost ceremonial quality to her actions, as if she were gathering strength and memories to sustain her through the challenges ahead. As they finally prepared to leave, Lily stood in the doorway of her bedroom, taking one last look at the space that had been both prison and sanctuary during her illness. Her gaze lingered on the incubator, its small light glowing steadily in the morning sunshine. "We'll both be different when I come home," she said softly to the egg. "But that's okay. Change is how we grow." Rex pressed gently against her leg, a silent affirmation of this simple truth. Together, they turned toward the stairs, toward the waiting family, toward the uncertain future that beckoned with both challenge and possibility. And somewhere, in the mysterious space between hope and reality, between science and faith, between the known and the inexplicable, the story of a child, a dog, and a small blue egg continued to unfold. A testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that even in the darkest circumstances, new life waits to emerge.